well, hold on. I don't even know the facts in this case, and I'm already supposed to have an opinion?
Welcome back, Dr. Frank Turek. How are you?
I'm great, Lucas. Great being with you. We had a great lightning round in the last.
Yeah, we've kind of been working you hard this week here
man.
at headquarters.
I'm breaking a sweat here.
Yeah, we got a couple podcast episodes, a few hours at GCU with the students. It's been good. This has actually been a high energy week for me, but it's been real joy having you here. And I think that I didn't give you enough accolades on the first episode, but you are just an absolute gem in the body of Christ. The way in which you have, I think, helped so many people not only answer some of these tough questions, but I think also teach other people how to be able to provide relevant answers to these questions. I think there's a lot of indebtedness that the body of Christ today owes to your work, and so thank you for spending your time here
brother.
with us.
I come from a long line of people that I'm standing on the shoulders of. Whenever you or me or anyone gets before an audience, it's because a lot of people poured into us.
Yeah,
and we took the time, obviously, to learn from them. So people like Norman Geisler, and he was my mentor, and I know you probably had mentors too, that if you didn't have them, you wouldn't be able to do it.
100%. Quite a few. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit on this episode, specifically thinking about, people that we have in our audience who are pastors, ministry leaders, and I'm also seeing a lot of young Gen Z Christians who are taking their faith and evangelism very seriously, and they're going to kind of the digital space to actively share their faith. A lot of TikTok live streams, and we actually do those with TPUSA Faith. We got a couple Gen Z influencers that we'll bring on there and dialogue with people live and take questions. How are you seeing the sort of the direction of apologetics in this we'll call it this new golden age of America that we're headed into? How is that changing, and what sort of things do you think that the next generation of apologists need to prepare for?
Well, like anything, it has its advantages and disadvantages. Let's talk about the advantages first. We have some videos on our YouTube channel that have millions of views. My mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler, didn't speak to 1 million people in his whole life, right? We could put out a video and, a week goes by and there's hundreds of thousands or 1 million views on it. And the guy I learned from never had that opportunity to reach so many people through that venue. So that's an advantage. And the only reason anybody knows who I am is really because of social media. I mean, you can write books and you can make a name that way. People might know you that way, but you're walking through an airport and somebody says, "Oh, I see you on YouTube," that kind of thing. And because so many people have seen the videos, and our mutual friend Charlie Kirk even more. I mean, he probably can't even go out.
Charlie, I think, owns the
anymore.
internet by now.
Right? Yeah. So that's the beauty of the digital age. Of course, the downside of the digital age, as you mentioned in our first podcast, there's a lot of information out there, but there's also a lot of misinformation.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm worried about personally is the younger generation being attached to their phones too young. Jonathan Haidt, NYU, I think psychology professor, if I'm not mistaken, not a Christian, but he wrote a book called Anxious Generation a year or two ago, where he said, I would never give my child a phone. They've got to be an adult before they get a smartphone. Because it's causing them to be anxious. They don't know how to deal with the information coming across it. It's all staccato. There's just so many problems with it. If you're not mature enough to use it, it could be a big issue. And I think that's one of the problems we have going forward.
I grew up, I was born in 1979, and so I'm either I think technically I'm the youngest Gen Xer, but I'm in kind of that, what they call the Xennial generation between Gen X and millennials. And so I can remember when we got our first computer, my dad brought home the Apple IIe, and, I was playing, little word games and stuff they had on it. And I can remember getting, a Nintendo and all those things for the first time. And obviously I didn't grow up with a cell phone in my pocket or anything like that. But I did have a phone fairly young. I was probably in my, early 20s, I think, when I got my first phone. And so I've had, for more of my life, I've had a phone than not had a phone, at this point. And I think, and I can see the ramifications even in my own life, over the years of the attachments to that. And I think about, the younger generation, specifically looking at maybe a generation alpha that never has known the difference. And really, you could argue Gen Z as well has had that in their hand. Many of them, the new pacifier is the iPad.
Oh, sure.
That's there. And I think that produces a lot of challenges.
Yeah, we weren't meant to take on that much information and have an opinion on everything and be able to evaluate all this information coming at us through our phones 24/7. And isn't it interesting that there have been periods in our country recently where if you're on social media and you didn't respond with some sort of opinion on a big event, somehow you were being negligent. How come you didn't talk about it?
Yeah, if you even took 3 days off the internet, like you were a bigot, if you didn't respond.
How come you don't have the right little emoji on your on your Twitter feed or whatever? I mean, well, hold on. I don't even know the facts in this case, and I'm already supposed to have an opinion?
No, that's very true. What are some other things that you think are advantages to the time that we're entering into in terms of how can we use maybe some of these new social media apps?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any innovative ways that you're seeing in apologetics right now beyond maybe the typical of just sharing a video content?
Yeah, what we're doing and we're doing here at TPUSA Faith, and we're doing at our ministry, crossexamine.org, is we can go a lot deeper with people that are all around the world through online courses, right? It's kind of shallow just to see a 1 minute short or even a 4 or 5 minute Q&A video. But we take people through hours and hours of video online and then meet with them via Zoom for Q&A.
Yeah.
I can instruct people without ever leaving my office. And they can be all over the country, even all over the world. We had a guy in Nigeria the other night on our online course. So it might not sound all that innovative, but it's actually, I think, a very powerful way to disciple people all over the world without ever leaving your office.
We're probably taking this for granted a little bit over the last couple of episodes, but we're talking about this term apologetics, or having an apology for the faith. Can you break down maybe the history of that word a little bit in kind of Christian usage, and where does that come from?
It comes from a Greek word in 1 Peter 3:15, apologia, which means to give a defense. Doesn't mean you're saying you're sorry. It means you're giving evidence. You're giving hope for the reason that you have, or the reason for the hope that you have is the right way of saying it. It's just a word that means you're giving evidence for your position. And sometimes it's even used in politics. You might say, well, he's an apologist for Donald Trump, or he's an apologist for Joe Biden or whatever, right? He's somebody that's trying to defend that particular politician or that particular policy. So it's used not just in Christian lingo, it's used in everyday usage.
And I think, a lot of people, especially in the ministry world, are familiar with that term, or if they watch a lot of videos like, what you do or Charlie does or whatnot, they're familiar with it. But every now and then I'll find somebody who goes, well, I don't need to apologize for my faith,
That's why I tend to use the word evidence.
Yes.
It's evidence for the faith.
Yeah. So when you're going around to campuses, is this mostly at campuses that you're doing, or you go to churches as well, or kind of both?
Both, but I really enjoy going to campuses because the reason we decided to go to campuses is because I think that's the most anti-Christian real estate in the United States is the college campus.
How long have you been doing that?
Well, probably since 2004, so about 20 years. Really started doing it every year religiously, began in 2007.
Toughest campus you've been to?
University of Michigan.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, most atheists showed up.
Okay.
It was just one atheist after another atheist after another atheist, But I've been to I haven't been to UCal Berkeley, so I don't know how that would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, Michigan was pretty tough. And actually, it was tougher 10 years ago than it is now. 10 years ago, there was a new atheist movement where they were, I debated Christopher Hitchens a couple times. He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent.
Of course.
And the new atheists didn't have new arguments. They just had a new attitude that, that Christianity and religion in general is evil.
Yeah, more of a militant atheism.
Yeah, militant atheism rather than, hey, I just don't believe in God. I don't see any evidence, Do you have any evidence?
Do you feel like that movement has imploded a little bit, or is it still there?
No, it's imploded.
Yeah.
And the reason, first of all, it's not true.
Yeah.
But another reason it's not satisfying, What hope does atheism give you?
Yeah.
It doesn't give you any hope. right?
What's the makeup of an atheist today that you're seeing, of kind of the average atheist that you run into, or that has a rebuttal against your points or has questions? What would you say is kind of the ethos of that individual?
The ethos is they're looking for excuses to live the life they want to live. It's not so much about the evidence for God's existence. It's really more about the evidence for their resistance. They don't want God to exist. They want to go their own way. That's why I always ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? No. Wait. I thought you claimed to be reasonable. How is it reasonable that you wouldn't believe something that turned out to be true?
Yeah.
So I think a question like that just cuts through all the noise, and it forces them to tell you the truth about what's their motivation here. Because, look, I'll use an example of a couple of guys who look at the New Testament differently. The top New Testament scholar of the last century, manuscript scholar, was Bruce Metzger from Princeton University. He had a student by the name of Bart Ehrman, you may have heard of,
Yep.
right? Who is a skeptic of the New Testament. Bruce had a better pedigree. He went to Princeton. He then became a professor at Princeton. Bart went to Wheaton, okay. Moody, okay. And then went to Princeton under Metzger. They came to opposite conclusions about whether or not Christianity was true. They're both looking at the same evidence, but they have different conclusions. Why might that be? Because they have different commitments, right? I think the evidence is strong for Bruce's position.
Yeah.
Bart thinks, oh, it's not that good, even though Bart will admit that his resistance to Christianity is not the manuscript evidence. He thinks that the Bible and the Christian worldview does not provide an adequate answer to the problem of evil. Now, I would ask Bart, if there's no God, what do you mean by evil? Because there is no evil unless there's good, and there's no good unless God exists. But the point here is that both gentlemen are highly trained. Metzger is the mentor of Ehrman. They look at the same evidence to come to opposite conclusions. Why is that? It's not about the evidence, is it? It's about something else going on. Now, maybe it's Metzger that just wants it to be true, and Bart is right. I don't think that's the case.
Right.
But Bart has already said miracles. If I'm an historian, I can't conclude a miracle has occurred. Well, he's already ruled out Christianity. No matter how much the evidence points to Christianity, he's going to say, no, it can't be. So it's a commitment.
People starting with a bias, they're already beginning, before they even look at the data, with a conclusion in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to do something with you. We got a few minutes left here on the show, and I want to open up my friend ChatGPT here.
Hey, I got that friend too.
I thought I was the only one for a while, and then realized that I'm not. And I want to. I've kind of set it up here, so I'm going to ask it for 10 questions.
We got 8 minutes. We're going to do 10.
Yes. Well, I'll pick and choose the ones I want
here. Here we go.
If you're like most churches today, giving isn't just happening in the offering plate anymore. It's happening online, in apps, and even at kiosks in the lobby. And that's where Secure Give comes in. They've been a trusted partner to ministries for nearly 2 decades, helping churches of every size simplify and strengthen their giving experience. Whether you're a small church plant just getting started or a growing church looking for a better solution, Secure Give has the tools you need. They make it easy for people to give faithfully and securely, anytime, anywhere. So if you're ready to level up your digital giving, head to securegive.com/turningpoint. And don't forget to use promo code TurningPoint to get your first month completely free. Again, that's securegive.com/turningpoint. This episode is brought to you by Wildflower Coffee Company, specialty coffee brand founded by a Christian husband and wife team, the husband having proudly served in the U.S. military. Wildflower is committed to quality. All of their coffee is organic, roasted to order, direct trade, free from mold and mycotoxins, all made right here in the USA. They've just launched Mind Glow, a new mushroom latte mix that blends the energy boost of coffee with the adaptogenic power of 6 different mushrooms, ashwagandha, and the comfort of cacao. It contains no artificial flavors, binders, fillers, or gums, just clean, functional ingredients designed to support gut health, sharpen your focus, and help fight brain fog. Just add steamed milk and honey, and you're good to go. Head to wildflowercoffeecompany.com and use code STRONGCHURCH at checkout for 10% off your first coffee order. Again, that's wildflowercoffeecompany.com, and the code is STRONGCHURCH for 10% off. All right, from ChatGPT, coming at you, 10 challenging questions that critics or skeptics might pose against Christianity. All right, so if God is good and all-powerful, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world?
Free will. That's the only way we could have love. Free will gives us the capacity to love, but also the capacity to hate. The answer to the problem of evil is Christianity. If we had never sinned, Jesus would not have to come save us. But since we did sin, he came to this earth, took our punishment upon himself, the only innocent person in history, and by trusting in him, we can not only be forgiven, but given his righteousness. Why did God have to do that? Because he's infinitely just. He can't allow sin to go unpunished, so he punishes himself in our place because he loves us. But he's not going to force us into heaven against our will. He won't force you in. You've got to accept the free gift if you want to be with him.
If I were to, let me push in on that a little bit, and I think that's a great answer, and that's about, how I would answer it as well. We have obviously people from a lot of different backgrounds that are part of TPUSA faith, and we've got, churches that would hold to more of a free will model, and we have churches that would hold to maybe a stronger, more radical reform position as well. If you were to argue this from the reformed position, from a more 5-point Calvinist position, does this become a harder question at that point?
It totally does, because I have friends who are reformed and 5-point Calvinists, and when they get to the question of evil, what's the origin of evil, they will say mystery. And my point is, it's not a mystery. If God makes all the choices, he is the origin of evil, because he causes us to choose evil when we choose it. He caused Satan to choose evil. He caused Adam to choose evil, and all of us to choose evil.
For people, just some higher purpose that we can't understand.
Yes, that we can't understand. Yeah. Now, is it possible that that's true? Well, I guess it's possible. The problem is it makes God more like Allah than Yahweh, right? That God isn't essentially good, that God actually has chosen evil for us.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I want to, be clear. I think that both views can be within the realm of orthodoxy.
Sure.
But I would lean strongly towards the first one we talked about here.
Because you're predestined to think that.
Right. I'm predestined to think that way. That's great. So what about contradictions in the Bible? I heard an online kind of Christian apologist here recently say that he takes the position that there are no contextual contradictions in Scripture, but there are minor contradictions, from different people's viewpoints. For instance, whether we take a staff or whether the disciples should take a staff or not take a staff, in Jesus' instructions. Where do you stand on the issue of kind of contradiction in Scripture regarding inerrancy?
Okay, well, first of all, when someone says I found a contradiction in the Bible, my first question is, where is it? Let's look at it. And second, so what does that prove? Let's suppose, I don't think this is true, but let's suppose for the sake of argument, there are minor errors in the Bible. Does that mean Christianity's false?
No.
And the answer is no. In fact, let me give you an illustration of this. Bart Ehrman, the guy we were talking about earlier, thinks that because we find supposed contradictions in the New Testament resurrection accounts, that you can't trust the Bible. Was there one angel at the tomb or two? Who got to the tomb first? How many women were there? What were their names? All that kind of stuff. Actually, I think that's a hallmark of good eyewitness testimony. I just had my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective, on the show just a week or so ago on this very topic. But I point out that, do you know that eyewitnesses of the Titanic, people that survived it, disagreed on how it sank? Some said it went down whole. Others said it broke in two and went down. Okay, what does that prove? Well, they had different perspectives, but they all agree on one thing. The Titanic sank, right? The same thing is true when it comes to the New Testament.
Yeah.
They may have these things you're trying to figure out, who got to the tomb first, what were their names, all that kind of stuff. But what do they all agree on? There was a resurrection. That's the main point. We wouldn't conclude the Titanic didn't sink because these eyewitnesses had varying testimonies about how it sank. They agree on it sank. And we shouldn't say Jesus didn't rise from the dead because we have these variant viewpoints on minor details. How can we explain the Titanic? Well, look, it was dark. They were in shock. Different aspects on the boat. If you're on the bow or the stern, you can't see it break in two. If you're on the, either side, you could, right? It's explainable, in other words. And eyewitness testimony always agrees. If it's good eyewitness testimony, they always agree on the essential event. They disagree on the details. That's what we have in the New Testament.
That's good. That's good. Okay, so let's see here. Is Christianity just a copycat religion? This one's interesting. Borrowing from older myths like Horus or Mithras?
No, because most of Mithras is after Christianity, not before. And Horus and Osiris weren't true resurrections. They were underworld, shadowy kind of figures that didn't come back to life. It's mythological. It's not physical, like Jesus comes back to life physically. And even if it was a copycat in the sense that there are common themes, that doesn't mean it isn't true. It would be no more copycat. You wouldn't say that because some space shuttle missions seem to have similar characteristics to Star Trek episodes that there was no space shuttle missions, right? Just because there are parallels doesn't mean that the event that's being paralleled didn't actually occur. In fact, I don't know if you ever heard this, but there was a ship that actually left Ireland in the early 1900s, and it had, in its maiden voyage, it was an unsinkable ship, hit an iceberg, went down, thousands of people died.
It sounds like the Titanic.
Yes,
You're
it
right.
does,
Yes.
doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, actually, it was The Futility, which was a novel written in 1898, 15 or so years before the Titanic actually went down. It actually became true in a sense because it had very similar characteristics to something that happened 15 years later. Now, are we going to say the Titanic didn't sink because some guy wrote a novel called The Futility, which after the Titanic sank, he renamed it. It came out again called The Titan.
Got to tighten that up a little bit there.
You've got to evaluate the evidence as you see it. Not say, well, it's got similarities, so it can't be true.
So good. So good. Dr. Frank Turek, if we want to find out more about you, where can we go?
Crossexamine.org, crossexamine with a D on the end of it.org. Also have a podcast called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That's twice a week. It's on that website or wherever you get podcasts. We also have a TV show on the NRB network, National Religious Broadcasters Network, Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. It's streamed on our YouTube channel, on our website as well. And there's the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, right there.
I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Norman Geisler, Frank Turek. Frank, real pleasure to have you on the show today. Make sure and check out the curriculum, too, here at TPUSA Faith. If you're not using that in your church with Dr. Frank, definitely be worthwhile. That's offered free of charge, as always. Thanks for watching Strong Church. I'm your host, Lucas Miles. Until next time, stay brave, be bold.